Hi friends, welcome to today's lesson here at Active Self-Protection Extra. Got a really special, great one for you today. My friend Ed Monk, who owns Last Resort Firearms Training, is probably one of the preeminent people in America dealing with understanding the problems of an active killer. And Ed let Neil and I, when we took his class back in December, hang a mic on him and get all this incredible content of his classroom stuff about how these problems really happen, who the aggressors are, and the best ways to solve it. Now, I'm not gonna be able to bring all of it to you. It's about 10 hours of classroom experience, and you gotta experience it with Ed. But I want to bring you some of it so that you get some of the distilled knowledge and it gets out to everybody in our nation. Information on where you can train with Ed is in the description. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Mountain Man Medical has name brand proven trauma medical supplies with a price match guarantee to ensure you get the right gear at the right price. Check them out at get-asp.com/mountainman.
My goals for this training is that you better understand the active shooter threat. How we teach it at Last Resort, there's basically 3 threats outside your home. Number 1, statistically most likely, is the parking lot experience, the mugger, right? Number 2 is the active shooter. Number 3 is the violent protester or rioter. They are vastly different in every way, and the numbers of them, their goals, legal scrutiny, the type of weapons they'll have. So how you understand that this is a different threat, how it's different. Skills, tactics, need to respond to it, and then an assessment of your individual skills and gear. So at the end of tomorrow, if you're happy with where you are, you just have a training plan to maintain that. If you're not happy with where you are, then look at skill and gear changes that might help you improve that. A little about dear old me. So I spent a little over 24 years active duty in the Army. The last 20 of that was as an armor officer, so a combat arms armor officer. Never did I fight an active shooter in the Army. So how does that relate to this? Well, it does. What we pay combat arms Army officers to do is to define a threat, to look at a potential threat and define it. What are its capabilities? What are its strengths? What are its weaknesses? What are its most likely courses of action? That's exactly what Army officers do in combat arms planning. Then once we have defined the potential threat we're likely to face, how do we build an operational plan to defeat that enemy that we've defined? And then how do we create a training plan to train operators to carry out that operational plan that we've designed to defeat the enemy that we've defined? And that's exactly what we need to do here. A little bit of police and deputy work, but honestly, my time in that and my training provided by that hasn't been that good. I have been on a personal jihad with this, doing individual research on this ugly topic for about 13 years, and for about the last 10 years, I've been providing training like this to all sorts of different audiences and people. So I seek out specific training in active shooter. I speak about it quite a bit at conferences and other venues, and then I train, not so much on the road, because as you'll see, this is kind of logistically intensive for the way I train it. So I don't travel a lot, but we do it a lot at our place. So we teach cops, subset of cops, SROs, CSSOs are what acronym in Arkansas for school armed school staff. Certified school security officers, I think is what they're called. Church security teams and armed citizens. So, to brag on myself, I graduated in the top 5% of the bottom third of my class at the military academy, okay? So I was on the dean's list, but it was the other list that he kept. I taught school. After I retired from the military, I taught school in 2 different states, and that helps me when I go to schools because everybody's cliquish. Cops are cliquish, okay? Schools are cliquish. And the fact that I have taught school, when I go to talk to them about this topic, they're like, oh, okay, we'll listen to you because you know what it's like for us here in the school. So as I have researched and continue to study and work on this threat, I look at it from all these perspectives because that's all the experience that I've had. Why in the world do I spend time, and do I think, educate the public on this specific threat? Why do we need to better train armed citizens to respond to this threat? Why do we need to change most school, church, and business response plans for this threat? Because we've been screwing this up for over 30 years pretty bad, pretty consistently. We've been treating patients with leeches. We keep putting the leech on, the patient keeps dying, and our only response is, maybe we're not using the right kind of leech. Maybe we need more leeches. But no one's saying, maybe we ought to change what we're doing, because what we're doing is getting bad results. So we'll cover these in detail, but 1989, a guy took a rifle to an elementary school playground and shot 35 people before he decided to stop himself and clocked out. Could have been 36, could have been 40, but he decided to stop. 10 years later, two high school students went in their high school and shot 34 people. And the only reason it's not 100 is because they decided to get down on their knees and, as rehearsed, put their own guns in their own mouths, count to 3 and kill themselves. Cops weren't even in the building. They shot 34, pretty much the same result 10 years later, but it could have been over 100, easily could have been over 100. They just decided to stop. 19 years later, just a few years ago, a guy went inside his former high school and shot 34 people. And the only reason it's not 50 or 60 is because he decided to drop his rifle and his vest with a whole bunch of ammo still in it and just walk out. No one was in the building. It could have been a lot more. 30 years, we keep getting a result. If you're okay with 30 plus people being shot, then don't change. But I'm not okay with 30 people being shot every time. But that's what we keep getting because we're not changing what we're doing. So, last several years, I've spoken at a lot of conferences, and especially when I go to conferences with cops and teachers, this is what I see. Massive amounts of money, time, and effort, and thought, and anguish over what do we do before the attack to try to prevent it. A lot of talk about that, okay? Not a bad thing to try to do, but there's a lot of effort, time, money, and that. And there's a whole bunch of the same money, products being produced and sold, effort about, okay, after the last shot is fired, what do we do? A lot of stuff got to be done. How do we make that easier? But what no one is talking about is how do we stop this bastard in the first 30 seconds? Now, cops will talk about once we get there, how do we stop him? But hell, that's 5 minutes from now. Nobody is talking, how do we stop this guy in the first 30 seconds so we have a low number? Nobody. And it just flabbergasts me. We want to understand what's most likely to happen so that we can best prepare mentally, physically, and skill-wise to deal with it. We want to prepare organizations give them the best chance of deterrence, right? The saying is, the only gunfight I guarantee you don't lose is the one you don't get in. Well, if you don't come here, guess what? Your victim count is 0. But I don't know of anybody that claims they have a plan that'll guarantee deterrence, so if deterrence fails, we got to have a plan to stop him quickly. And then to prepare individuals, mentally, gear-wise, skill-wise, and tactics-wise. What do churches need to know? They got to get past the ugly. They got to get past the ugliness. A lot of hesitance, a lot of resistance, and a lot of inertia. Just keep doing what we're doing. Okay, here from my very little perspective, the very few churches I've had a thing with, up until the Sutherland Springs attack, where 46 people were shot in a church in Texas. 80% of the churches I talked to, I'd give presentations to, offer them a plan. Yeah, we see what you're saying. We see what you're saying, but we're not there. After Sutherland Springs, 80% went the other way. That we have a team, we're forming a team, or we're talking about forming a team. That was what broke the camel's back for them. Okay. There's a lot of churches, at least the leadership, are very left-leaning, so they're just like guns are never the solution to anything. Some is the religious aspect of it, turn the other cheek, nonviolence, and some is just the old-timer. You don't take a gun in God's church, in God's house. You know, I carry a gun everywhere I go, but not in God's house. Well, guess what? When he shows up, he's going to bring a gun in God's house. And because you don't have one, that's when the math gets bad. Churches attract problems. What do churches say? Churches, by and large, say, have you hit rock bottom? Have you absolutely got nowhere else to go? Come to us. Right. That's what church, now if you're rich and happy, come too. But that's what churches do, God love them. If you are at the worst point in your life, come to us. And so because of that, they attract some bad elements. What I tell churches, and when you look at risk assessment, you look at two things. How likely is it to happen, and what are the effects if it does? Well, active shooting is on the extremes. It is very unlikely, but if it does, it's freaking catastrophic. Churches are much more likely to have to deal with other issues. I've probably talked with over 100 churches on this. I haven't talked to one church yet that's dealt with an active shooter, but all of them have had issues with other things. Trying to pick up kids that they don't have custody of, the mentally ill guy that comes in the middle of service talking out of his head, taking off his clothes, where's the plan for that? Okay? The shooter is not a member and not an attender. Now, he may have been there, but he's not a regular attender and he's not a member. Most of the good big shootings start in the parking lot, so you have to have security in the parking lot. If you can identify him and hopefully stop him out there, your number will be low. If you let him get in the building, and now it gets a little more complex. Parking lots is where most of the big ones start.
Like shooting in the parking lot, so they'll start.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Like
And
start shooting whoever as they come in.
Yep. And you got to kill the boogeyman. Oh, we don't want guns in the church because. And so my standard one of my standard answers is, well, we think if we let people in the church be armed, then this might happen. Maybe, but it never has. And would that be worse than 46 people being shot? Because that's what happened in Sutherland Springs when they didn't have anybody in there. If you never had a chance to listen to Dr. William Aprill talk, sorry about that. He's a fascinating guy. I was lucky to hear him 3 or 4 times before he passed away. And one of his quotes that I love is, to properly plan for violence, you must first admit and accept that the world is not as it ought to be. And that's what a lot of people and leaders of organizations, including some churches, obviously not yours, they're not willing to do that yet. But I'll show you some examples of that. This is a come-as-you-are event. Whatever you have in place, gear, mental preparation, plans, whatever you have in place when he fires his first shot is what you've got to work with. I was a social studies teacher, so I can work my topic into anything, as a good teacher can. So this is from Patrick Henry's Liberty or Death speech. It is natural for man to indulge in the illusion of hope, and that's one of the big problems with leaders of organizations is they can't get past hope. We all hope he doesn't come to our location. Nothing wrong with that, but we got to get beyond that. We hope he doesn't come here, but if he does, but most of them can't get beyond the hope. For my part, whatever anguish or spirit it may cost, I'm willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst for it, to know how ugly this is. And a lot of people, and I'll show you some examples, they're just not willing to admit to themselves how ugly it is. I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. I know of no way of judging the future but by the past. So that's exactly true here. To try to get in our mind what we think we're most likely to see if an active shooter ever comes here, we look at the attacks of the past. This, I think, in my research, shows us what is happened most often in the past, therefore most likely to happen in the future. There could be an active shooter somewhere tomorrow in the country that the organization is attacked by 7 lesbian left-handed nuns using crossbows. That's possible, but it's not what's happened in the past, okay? The shooter is a young male. Have there been females? A handful. Have there been older shooters? A few, but by and large, they're young. They plan their attack in a gun-free zone, meaning a place where it's not legal for anybody to have a gun, so when they show up with their illegal gun, they're going to have a monopoly on gunfire for that time gap it's going to take to get cops there, and that time gap is enough time to let them get 30 or 40 or 50 people shot. It's not political. They are simply using math against us. They know they have the time delay to get them enough. Now, this is a trend. By and far, this is true, but this is a trend over the last 3 to 4 years that we've actually seen a slight upswing in attacks in places where it is legal to carry. And sometimes we make them pay the price for that, and sometimes we don't. They usually have multiple weapons, and one of those multiple weapons is a long gun, meaning a rifle or a shotgun. Now, there are several studies out there that would say I'm incorrect in this, that only like 25 to 30% have multiple guns. But those studies use a definition of active shooter that I think is far too broad. If my wife is cheating on me with her boss and I go to her workplace and shoot her and her boss and clock myself out, I consider that a double homicide suicide, not an active shooter, okay? So you will see, you may see studies where they say that's not true, but what I define an active shooter as, they're usually coming with more than one gun. One of them is going to be a long gun, and that's what they're going to start with. They're going to shoot that long gun until it malfunctions or runs out of ammo, dump it, go to the second gun, dump it, go to the next. 4 is the most I've seen. They have a lot of ammo. They last a relatively short time, but that's relative, right? If you go for a doctor's appointment at 3 o'clock and at 3:03 they say he's ready to see you, you think, crap, that's 3 minutes went by, no time at all. I didn't even have time to play on my phone. But if we're all getting shot at in this building for 3 minutes, that'll seem like a freaking eternity, right?